Get started here. Okay. Soon as Libby gets done greeting everybody, we'll get started here. Just take your time, Libby. We got all day.
Just now, I think it was just muted at the back there. Can you hear me now? Oh, wonderful. That's going. Always such a joy to be with you. Thank you for coming out on a Saturday, and I'm excited about just the conversation that's going to happen here. And really what I hope to do this morning is to, this first session, just use it as a introduction and the catalyst to a conversation that we'll facilitate afterwards. So you're not just going to listen today, you're going to actually converse a bit. So Papa, we thank you. Why don't each one of you just welcome your Abba's Spirit of Truth to come and reveal himself and surprise you. Woo! Do you know that the Spirit of God doesn't just want to come tell you stuff you already know? John 5:20 says, everything the Father has, He's showing it to me, and He will show you even greater things so that you may be astonished. God has got so much more in mind for you than simply confirming what you believe already. Because astonishment is an experience that rattles you. It decenters you. It confronts you with a reality that is outside of your frame of reference. You cannot be astonished and certain at the same time. And so our Abba, through this beautiful gospel, wants to astonish us with what he knows about you, with what he sees in this cosmos, to invite you to see with him. So this morning I want to talk about your story, that there are areas, there are possibilities, there's opportunities, there's beauty in your story that is yet to be discovered. It's very often we become so familiar with our stories and how we've interpreted it and who we are that we no longer really open to astonishment. Now, some stories travel such a predictable path, and they become so protective of their narrative and the meaning they create that by the end, they mean exactly what they intended to mean from the beginning. What a boring story that is. Other stories seem to, at one point, begin to fall apart, and then there are surprising moments of restoration and joy, and there are twists and turns, and those stories are the most exciting stories. Have you ever been to a movie and in the first 2 minutes you know who the good guys are, the bad guys, and how it ends, and you wonder, why did they bother? The best stories kind of confuses you halfway through. They even upset you and make you mad. And it's only by the end that the beginning finds new meaning, begins to make sense. You are not just a product of the events that happen to you. You are also the product of the interpretation that you gave those events. And so we continually go through life asking and questioning, what does this mean? And we begin to construct a framework of interpretation, and we become comfortable with our interpretation, especially if our anticipation for the future is confirmed based on the lessons that we've learned, and our stories become more and more predictable. And there's a time where that is necessary. But very often in constructing our stories, they also become so predictable that they become closed off to the surprising newness and otherness that God wants to do in your life. Let me start off by drawing some contrasts between story, and I might have done this here before, I don't know. If I have, you'll just hear it again. But I want to draw some contrast between story and plan. How many of you have heard the idea that God has a plan for your life? Everyone is familiar. That is a metaphor that is useful, but I think we have pushed it to an extent where it wasn't supposed to be pushed to. And so I'm going to contrast story with plan a bit and maybe break down some ideas around plan. And it's not that plan in itself is bad. We're going to get back to plan and redeem it. Just kind of want to put it in its proper perspective. The best plans have got few surprises. The best stories have got many surprises. The best plans try to anticipate every future possibility and make mitigating plans so that it is never surprised. The best stories unfold naturally, and they are full of twists and turns that no one anticipated. Now, when we only relate to God with the metaphor of plan, it presents us with some difficulties, because it works well until we hit disaster, until we hit something that is just terrible, maybe even evil, unjust, wrong. When we hit that situation and the only way we relate to God is with the metaphor of plan, what happens? We kind of trying to explain this situation in one of two ways. The first way is, what? I missed the plan. Is that something you've ever thought of? I missed the plan. That's why I'm in this situation. Somehow God is loving and caring and protecting while I'm in the plan. But should I step out, all hell's going to break loose. And so we often then have this feeling of distance, because something wrong happens because I've stepped out of the plan. Is that familiar? The other way in which we explain it, and there are people that, wholeheartedly find comfort in the idea that disaster is God's plan, that this is part of his intention, etc. That too, I think, creates a sense of distance, because we don't say it out loud, but what we think is, what the heck, I can make better plans than this. God should find another occupation. If this is the plan, this is horrible. You won't often hear that being said, but I think that is what happens in people's heart. Really? Is this horrible, evil situation part of a good God's intention for my life? And so can you see, when the only metaphor with which you relate to God is plan, there's parts of your journey where that will create a sense of distance. Either I missed the plan and God withdrew his protection, favor, whatever, or whatever we think God's goodness is, it's so alien that it's exactly the opposite of what we understand goodness to be. Both those situations creates a sense of distance. But when we start relating to God with the metaphor of story as well, and I will redeem the plan later on, but let's for a moment imagine that God does not have a plan for your life. Just for a moment, imagine a God who doesn't stand behind you with a plan, but the God who stands in front of you with possibilities, saying, I want to invite you to co-author a story that has never been written before. I want you to co-create you. Ooh, that will take a while to sink in. It's still sinking in for me. Because this changes everything. You see, a good story has some chapters that ends in disaster. But it's not the end of the story. Some of the best stories are stories that has a chapter that makes you mad, that confuses you. But this is not the whole meaning of the story. Meaning is still unfolding. The story is still happening. Every ending is also a new beginning. Why did Jesus say, it is finished? So that he could begin the new creation. He never gets stuck in just what is finished. He is also the God that continues to use every ending to unfold new meaning, to unfold new beauty, to unfold newness of life. And so when we start relating to God in terms of a story, I can suddenly see in the life of Jesus an example of somebody, of a God who steps right into our condition, right into our humanity. A God who demonstrates that even in the greatest depths of despair, of pain, of hell, he's aware that his Father has not left him, that his Father is always with him. And in fact, in the book of John, he tells his disciples, you will all be scattered, go your own ways, leave me alone. But actually, I'm not alone, because the Father is always with me. And so he comes to demonstrate a God who is with us at every step of that story. Paul writes, I've learned the secret of contentment. No matter what circumstances I find myself in, whether I abase or abound, I've learned the secret of contentment. What is that secret? That secret is an awareness of your Abba's embrace, of your Abba's presence, no matter how confusing the story might be at this moment. To know that he's the one who's in front of us, creating possibilities. While we're on possibilities, because this is so much part of story and story versus plan, I want you to consider this as well. One can never reduce possibility to certainty. Does that make sense? If something is possible, it's not certain. And if something's certain, it's not possible. Because of our own insecurities, we have created the God of absolute certainty. But Jesus introduces us to a God for whom all things are possible, not certain. See, there's a stage in life as we begin to construct our own stories, and to a large extent, the self that you are aware of is a narrative. It's a story. It's the history of interpretation that has given you your sense of self, of who you are, of how I relate to my world. And from a very early age, as we begin to try and give meaning to our life events, the best way to give an event greater meaning is to put it in the context of a story. In the same way as a musical note in isolation does not have much beauty until you put it in the context of a melody. And something, suddenly that note has a beauty that it did not have in isolation. In the same way, we take our life events and we constantly try and fit it into a framework of interpretation, into a story that we are already familiar with. And so from a very early age, we try and work out how are these events connected. And we discover nothing connects our life events more than the self that remembers them. There's no greater common denominator in all these events than the I that was conscious of those events. And this happens maybe to a large extent subconsciously, but we find ourselves in our stories. And when we emerge out of, the pre-conscious state of babyhood into a conscious world, one thing that the conscious mind wants to do is find security, find how things work. And so toddlers will discover the amazing capacity of their consciousness to give meaning to their world and to even influence their world. And at some stage, the toddler will discover, I can say no and influence my world. And they want to use that ability continually. Do you want to come? No. Do you want? No. They found this wonderful ability to influence their world. And don't take it too personally. It's not a no to you. It's just this discovery of I have power. My consciousness has an influence on what happens. And so in early child development, there is a natural and necessary pursuit for security, and certainty promises security. If I can predict what the outcome will be, if I do A, B, and C, then D is the outcome. We are introduced into the logic of cause and effect, and that is necessary for storytelling. We perceive reality not just as something static, but as something that flows from the past into the future. And we are not satisfied with just beholding reality as it is. We want to influence it. We want to create a future that's more enjoyable than what it is without our contribution to it. And so from a very early age, certainty promises security. And in a way, it actually delivers that security. It makes good on that promise because, a prison is very secure. It's very secure. It's very cramped. And so many of us at some stage of our lives have become the prisoners of our own certainty. We've become the prisoners of our own stories. We've become bound by the familiar interpretation that we've always given our stories. It reminds me of Rebecca. Rebecca, who's one of the first characters in the Bible who speaks of herself in this subconscious, in this subjective, existentialistic way when she says, it's in Genesis 24, why I? What am I? Who am I? What? She becomes conscious of herself. And moments before then, it actually speaks of her barrenness. I think this is that kind of presence. Very often our stories become barren. We become so familiar with who we are, with who God is, with how our story will unfold. It becomes so boringly predictable that the story is barren. And it's in the midst of this barrenness that Isaac prays for her. She conceives, and suddenly she becomes aware of something else happening within her. This pregnancy is the most beautiful metaphor of discovering the other within the self. There is more to you than the self you're conscious of. There's more to you than the story you are familiar with. And this very confusing awareness of there's something more. You see, this pregnancy is kind of the experience of astonishment. Before the pregnancy, she knows who she is. She has her story worked out. She's confident, secure, but suddenly something decenters her. Suddenly there's something else happening within her. I call this divine doubt. It's God whispering that you have outgrown your little beliefs about me. You have outgrown your small little concepts of me. I'm making room for myself in you. And in order to make room for myself, I've got to make you aware of an other that is unknown. And it is this very confusing experience that drives her to inquire of the Lord. And interesting, God doesn't just restore her to saying, no, forget all that confusion. Let's just restore you to that certainty and that unity. No, rather God kind of confirms her disunity and says, yeah, there's two nations at war within you. There's something happening in you beyond your little secure and certain story. You see, the conscious and the unconscious, there's a time in life where we suppress the voice of the unconscious. We want just certainty. That voice never goes away, and it is actually that contrasting voice within us that creates a matrix of meaning, a complexity that offers us a much richer way of constructing our stories. Another beautiful picture, and I might get back to Rebecca, but let's quickly go to Genesis 1, where when God began creating, the world was chaotic, and darkness covered the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God begins to hover over this unformed, chaotic deep. That verse has been so painful for many theological explorations, because when we imagine a God who is in absolute control, we want him to begin creation and everything's perfect from the very start. And so that verse has always been, there's some fantastic, amazing, imaginative ways of explaining it. Many of them kind of hints at maybe the chaos is evil and God overcomes this evil chaos. But I think what the Hebrew writers beginning to introduce to us is firstly a God who has no need to be in control. A God who begins his creative process in the middle of our chaos. A God who doesn't need a perfect, ordered life in order to start a beautiful, new creative process of new meaning and new order. But the God who just comes and silently hovers, almost like in a contemplative silence over the chaos. Just hover there. Don't be afraid of the chaos. God doesn't burst into the chaos and say, we're going to rebuke it, get rid of it, and bring order. No, God just comes and let's just hover here. It's kind of like Jesus on that cross saying, hey, just hang out in your pain for a while. Just stay there. And as he hovers over this chaos, today we have something called chaos theory, which scientifically tells us that chaos might actually be just a different form of order. There's patterns starting to form. There's things starting to happen. And when things become most chaotic is when the most interesting new possibilities are realized. Woo! I look back at our lives and think that there's been times where everything seems to have fallen apart. There were times where I didn't think this could get any worse. And as I look back, I'm so glad for the possibilities that were realized in those moments. The decisions that were taken, the directions that we went to, the new life and new meaning that came forth only when that seed was buried and died. And then the dormancy was broken and something new blossomed. Don't despise those events of endings. Endings are also new beginnings. And for things to have real meaning in your life, it doesn't have, we always, I guess in our spiritual way of thinking about things, we think things have meaning if they last forever. No, they don't. I can spend a day with my son or my daughter, and although that event doesn't last forever, it's incredibly meaningful and beautiful. In fact, very often it is things that are temporal that intensifies the value. A few years ago, we went up to Breckenridge, and they wanted to sell us oxygen. I've never paid for oxygen. I just breathe it. Now, the reason we breathe it is because it's so abundantly available. But up there, people suddenly find the oxygen it's not as abundant as we thought it was, so we buy cans and spray it in. Can you see that because of the limitation and the finite availability of oxygen, suddenly it's more valuable? Yeah. Now we can sell it, like they have it free everywhere else. And so in the same way, there's a value attached to the temporality of your life events that continues beyond that event. Eternity is not just something that lasts very long. Eternity is finding the beauty in the temporal, finding the meaning in what is just now and passing away. So back to Rebecca, or back to Genesis and then Rebecca, because I want to explore if you are invited by God to co-author your story, how do we keep this story open to surprise? How do we keep this story open to astonishment? How do we not fall back into that place where we just create our comfortable little prison in which we exist in absolute predictability? So Genesis again, God is comfortable with the chaos. The chaos is not God's enemy. In fact, it seems like the chaos is the raw material from which God brings forth new meaning and new order. Have you ever thought of chaos as raw material? See, so God hovers over it. Then he says, let light be separated from darkness. Begins to see possibilities in this great depth that wasn't seen before. Begins to bring greater distinction, greater order, greater meaning. Now let's fast forward to Rebecca. And I want to quickly give an introduction. Many of us might have preconceived ideas with what is meant by the conscious and the unconscious. And it might be useful for understanding this or not, but maybe for a moment just lay down your definitions of conscious and unconscious and just appreciate what I'm trying to communicate with those two terms. Basically, the unconscious, I want to say, is a part of you that you are not in control of and that you do not know as well as you know the conscious part. So the self that you are conscious of, I would call that your conscious self. Does that make sense? And that part of you that is often ignored, not known, not seen, that I would call the unconscious. Now, the unconscious begins before the conscious self. When a child is born, they are not conscious of themselves yet, but there is a form of consciousness. I call that the unconscious. That's why a baby without self-consciousness perceives everything as one, as whole. That's why another baby might start crying and they'll just cry with, because this is, I'm one with all of this. Let's cry with, or someone else begins to laugh, they'll laugh with, because there's no separation between self and the other. And one of the symbols that is used of this unconscious or pre-conscious state, both in mythology and within the scripture, is the symbol of a circle, because a circle is the same at the top as the bottom, the same left and right. It's whole, it encloses everything. And that symbol developed into a few other forms. For instance, the circular serpent that swallows its own tail, that both impregnates itself and consumes itself. And includes all in one. It developed further into the idea of an encircled garden, which is part of many of the mythology of the Near East in the area where the Bible itself was written, also speaking about the enclosed garden. That pre-conscious state in which everything is whole, in which everything is one, is also a beautiful, peaceful state. There's all the contradictions coexist, but it's a state in which the normal logic and the normal flow of time doesn't work the same in that state. And we don't even have to try and remember when we were babies. Every time you go to sleep and you dream, one of the aspects of dreams is it's often a little bit more chaotic. Symbols present themselves to you in weird and wonderful sequences. Time doesn't work quite the same way in the unconscious as in the conscious. The logic of stories, especially when we look at our dreams from our conscious mind, we think, what the heck is wrong with my mind? How do you go in all those directions? But when you start appreciating that the unconscious is like that chaotic waters, and they present you with symbols and they say, does this mean this? Or does it mean this? Does it mean this? Your unconscious is not as certain about what things mean. And that is exactly why it is such a rich source of new meaning. Because in your conscious mind, you've already decided this is what this means, and it means nothing else. This is its only possibility. But your unconscious is not that sure. Maybe it means something else. And it gives you different options. Now, why is this interesting? Because it is this very questioning, this very openness to possibilities that makes it a rich source of new meaning. And I want to kind of conclude this session with taking the story of Rebekah and the birth of Esau and Jacob as a metaphor for the birth of the unconscious and the conscious. So Esau is born first, just like every child is born into this world in a pre-conscious state. And what is amazing, even before birth, the ear is formed before the brain is fully formed. It's like humans are geared to receive messages. We receive messages, and the question these messages ask is, what does it mean? What does it mean? It's an invitation to say, you can create meaning. Maybe I must say, give another metaphor in here. Grammar, the rules of language, is necessary to make our communication understandable. If I didn't follow the rules of the English language, you would probably not understand what I'm saying. But because I follow the rules, the grammar of English, we have an opportunity to meet somewhere and to understand one another. But grammar has not written one story. And within the rules of grammar, you are free to construct a story that has never been told before. So the rules are not a limitation. The rules are actually an enabler for you to communicate things that has never been communicated before. I mean, the rules of the English language was written long before many of the concepts that we have today was even a vague imagination. But within those rules, we can construct new concepts. So maybe God is not the one who enforces meaning and gives meaning to everything, but like grammar, God is the possibility of meaning. God is this framework that says, I make a meaningful life possible. But the story you construct is one that I authorize, enable, and invite you to construct yourself. Now, like a good parent, we can look at many scriptures. Jeremiah, I know the plans I have for you, or the thoughts I have towards you, thoughts to prosper you, not to harm you. Like a good parent, we do have ideals and desires for our kids, and God does too. But there's a difference between looking at my 2-year-old and deciding, you are going to be a dancer. And I don't care what you really want to do. This is my purpose for your life. And your only contribution is discover my plan and submit to it. We've imagined God has a plan for our life. We've pushed it to that extreme, where your only contribution is discover the plan and then stick to it. Has anyone discovered the plan? I think God is more like a good father, as Jesus suggested, who wants to nurture the natural capacities and capabilities of every child and enable them to become all that they naturally want to become, rather than that enforcer of a plan. So Esau is born first. He's ruddy with hair all over him. He's wild. That is kind of like the unconscious. It's not that tamed anymore. And we use the words conscious and unconscious. That's modern psychological terms. The Bible didn't have those terms, but the Bible speaks about dreams a lot. And that's the way in which the scriptures and the ancient texts are saying there's something about you beyond your conscious awareness. There's a depth to you that when you lose your conscious story, you access that. And in that realm of dreams, God often meets with people. God often communicates and brings stories together and connects all the scattered parts. So Esau, a symbol of the unconscious, is born first. Jacob is shortly afterwards, holding onto his foot, is dragged out as well. The conscious part of us is already in an embryonic form when we are born. And that grabbing of the heel is kind of a prediction of the conflict that's going to develop between these two. The two lads grow up. There's a part in which, there's the natural coexistence of the conscious and the unconscious. And maybe I must give a few examples just to show that it's there. You might sit with a problem, try and work it out, concentrate on it, fix your mind on it, try every avenue consciously to get to an answer. Then you leave it and you go have a walk in the park and don't think of it at all, and suddenly, there the answer is. Because there's a part of you that continues beyond your conscious control. Simple example. There are other things, I once started writing a little bit of a journal about when Marianne and myself first met, and I was thinking back, and this is 30 years almost ago, and some things are clear and some things are vague, and I was writing a little bit about this one event where she went to Queenstown and I stayed behind with a team and tried to remember things and couldn't. And then I stopped writing and just had a sip of my coffee, and suddenly the whole experience came back. I didn't just remember that event. I was there. I felt what I felt. I heard what I heard. I was back in that moment. It's like the sequence of time was suspended. And I was back in that moment. I just burst out crying of realizing that was still there. That whole event was there. So what psychologists would tell us is the conscious and the unconscious are like two systems. They record the same event twice. You may be in a situation, your unconscious records it and your conscious records it. And you can try and recall it from the conscious part, but every now and then something happens and you recall it from the unconscious. And it can be an amazing experience. Or if your life is a story, the unconscious text is written first and the conscious text is written over that unconscious text. And that creates a richness of interpretation. So Jacob, he's the one that wants to be in control. He makes a space for himself within their village. He builds his own tent because he's in control of his space. And he's more conscious of the future and the fact that I want the birthright. Where am I going? He's the part of us that's calculating, that's thinking, how can I be in control? Esau is the guy who, I don't need a tent. I just live in the wild. I hunt. And the art of hunting is very much the art of being present in the moment. You've got to be really aware of what's happening because it can be life-threatening, not just for what you're hunting, but depending on what you hunt, it's life-threatening for you as well. So the hunt is that part of you, the hunter of part of you that's present, not that concerned about birthright and future and whatever. I'm hungry. I want to eat now. That's why he sells his birthright. And this conflict between the conscious and the unconscious develops. And all of us, I think, goes through a period where it's necessary to lay aside the imaginative, to lay aside the fantastic. And there's a period in a child's life when he realizes, I need to be more clever now. I shouldn't just be a child living in my fantasy world. I need to experience life the way life is. And so there's a natural progression in which the imaginative and the subconscious is kind of to an extent silenced or suppressed, but it never goes away. And I see that the ultimate purpose is for God to bring about the beauty, the logic of the conscious with the possibility and the imaginativeness of the unconscious. And so Esau and Jacob are reconciled later. And this is something that happens in all of our lives. And the way it happens is so beautiful because it's at the point where this conflict reaches its climax and, Jacob deceives his father to take the birthright. And he just knows Esau is mad at him, so he flees. It's his fear of Esau, of the unknown, that makes him to flee to another country. And I won't go through the whole story, but part of that separation, he comes to a place called Bethel. And at this place, he gets reconnected to the unconscious again. He falls asleep. And in this dream, he sees angels ascending and descending. All the scattered parts and scattered messages are suddenly connected. Heaven and earth is connected. And he wakes up and he says, God, in our translation, it says, God is in this place and I did not know it. the Zohar Jewish translation and commentary is so beautiful. They translate that verse this way: God is in this I did not know. Ha ha. God is in this I did not know. You see, there's a period in life where we're very certain and confident with the self that I've constructed, the story that I'm familiar with. And I believe it is Papa's purpose and desire to set us free from that prison. And part of the way in which he sets us free from that prison is to cause doubt and faith to work together. Doubt begins to break down the certainties of the walls that you've been living in. And faith reaches beyond those borders to take hold of possibilities you couldn't see while you were stuck in that prison. So in this example, faith and doubt works together. In this example, doubt is not the opposite of faith. Rather, certainty is the opposite of faith. This is where faith begins to grab hold, not of certainties. That is your presumptuous faith movement type experience. We are certain. Faith is this beautiful humility that says, all things are possible for God. And we're starting to grab hold of those possibilities. We become familiar with the I did not know. This I that continually, that at times can irritate you, because whenever you're certain, this little voice says, really? Is that the only meaning it has? Isn't maybe this as well? And we kind of shut it down. But if we can just learn to let those two work together, where I can grab hold of possibilities and allow the voice of the unconscious to present many options of what it could mean and move forward from there. So to summarize, because what I want to do after this is we've got a way of facilitating conversation. And we're going to go into that, and I'll give you two options of when and how we'll do it. But let me just summarize what I hope to say today. The impression I want to leave you with is that God has such an extravagant gift of freedom available to each one of us. God is in no way at all interested in controlling your life. He's not the one who stands behind us, slapping us back into the path that he determined. Neither is he the one above us trying to enforce his design upon us. He's the one who is always in front of us. And this is where the Abrahamic faith was so different from much of what happened in that time. The Abrahamic faith was a God who is not yet, a God who is always in the future, inviting us out of what we're familiar with, out of what we know. He doesn't bring us into greater certainty. He always brings us out of what we're familiar with, into the wonder and the astonishment of a God and the story that is larger than what you've imagined. And so, even with that, I said our redeem plan. I've got no problem with God. I'm so grateful. God orchestrates things to our benefit. He many things we plan way ahead. The fact that we're here is because we had to plan months ahead to get tickets and, get here, etc. But within all of that planning, we always leave a little room for chaos, because that's where the most amazing things happen. And whereas previously I might have viewed a God who has everything happens in his plan, now I kind of view a God of such extravagant freedom and openness that he allows a few plans within this beautiful big story. There's room for plans, but don't ever allow your concept of plan to reduce your divinely given creativity to just a passive nothingness. You are invited to create the meaning of your life. Woo! Is that good news? Or is it scary? Or is it both? It's scary good. We don't often associate great leadership with micromanagement. Have you ever worked for a micromanager? Wants to know where, not long. What have you done with your past 2 hours? How did you do it? Why didn't you ask me how to do it? You know, that kind of micromanagement. You can't be very creative within that environment, can you? We associate great leadership with the kind of person that gives you more power than what you think you're ready for. A God that gives you space to make mistakes and says, hey, I know this is more than what you're comfortable with, but I've got your back. Even if you take the wrong turn completely, I will be right there creating new possibilities, saying, let me create possibilities that draws you back to this goal, which is, Father, that they may be one even as we are one, that they may be aware of this union, even as I'm aware of this union. And so in this creative process of constructing your own story, I introduced a new idea, and that is certainty and possibility is not the same thing. The conscious and the unconscious, they speak two different languages. It's like two different instruments. You need different musical notation to play a bass guitar than what you do a piano. And for us to come back again to that place where we are comfortable with the creativity and the imaginativeness of the unconscious. And within our conscious selves, we allow room for possibility and for new meaning. And we don't become stuck in a story that is smaller than what you really are. To a large extent, you are the story that brought you to this place, yes. But there's more involved than cause and effect. In between cause and effect, there's the God of possibility. I think this is the central, beautiful thing that we can take philosophically from quantum physics. Quantum physics basically tells us that even if I know all the inputs, like Newtonian, all the forces that I will apply to a certain neutron, I cannot predict what the result will be, because at the very foundational nature of reality, there's always more than one possibility. And so Heisenberg that developed this principle of uncertainty. Isn't that a beautiful principle? It's a principle that nothing's really determined, everything's just possible. He's the same person that said, if you start drinking from the cup of science, your first sip might make you an atheist. But keep on drinking. God is waiting at the bottom. And so so much of science is confirming the same beautiful understanding that there's more to life than cause and effect. In between cause and effect, there's the God of possibility that says your future does not have to be a repetition of your past. You can take from your past what you want to, the beauty you want to, but there's a possibility for new meaning, for new value, for new direction, for new excitement that is way beyond the story that you've told so far. Glory. Do you want to do a song and then we'll give the option? So after the song, we've got two options. We can either just have a bit of a conversation and then break for lunch and come back at 1, or what might be better while it's fresh is after the song, Marianne and myself will help you develop, break you into the groups in which we develop a conversation that's going to last. And then I'll conclude the conversation. So that means that we go from now until 1 o'clock and then we finish at 1, or we can come back at 1. So who would rather have a break and come back at 1? You can put your hand up. There's a few people. Who would rather go into the conversation now and we just continue until 1? Okay, so sorry to confuse that, but it seems like there's more people for the second part. It's a bit chaotic, I'm sorry. Let's do the song first and then we'll decide.
Won't you be quiet for a moment? Silence is calling you into the depths of the mystery, beyond what you can see. You'll find me waiting. No judgment, no temporary fixes. In love security, a whole new world of meaning unfolds inside of you. Whispers of desire, breathing life into the formless chaos. Rivers of kindness and mercy, as healing flows in ancient wisdom, yet new as the dawn. No judgment, no temporary fixes. This is love security. A whole new world of meaning unfolds inside of you. And there is no fear here. Love is loving you. There is no fear here. Love is loving you. Whispers of desire, breathing life into into the formless chaos, rivers of kindness and mercy, healing flows in ancient wisdom, yet new as the dawn. No judgment, no temporary fixes. This is love's security. A whole new world of meaning unfolds. It's inside of you, and you are seen. You're desired into being. Love is loving you. You are seen. You're desired into being. Love is loving you. There is no fear here. Amen.
I think what we'll do while it's fresh, and you'll find that this is kind of like a break in any case. That's why a break from listening to me. That's a good break. So we're going to do this. It's called the community of inquiry. We're going to break you up in, let me just see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 20. Break you up into 4 groups, I think. 4 groups of 5. And what the first thing you're going to do in your little group is, for a few minutes, 5 minutes, you can just comment and discuss on what was stirring within you during this session. In the next few minutes in your group, you're going to develop one question that, as a group, you want to present that question to the rest of the group. And we'll take it further from there. But now I'm just going to give everyone a number. Remember the number you are in, because that's your group. Okay? Will that work? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Sorry, I need your attention. You 4, 5. 1, 2, again 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Or do you want to stay together? 2, 3. Okay. 4. 4, Craig. So now all the ones come together, one place, all the 2s, all the 3s, all the 4s. If you can all move so that all the 1s are together, all the 2s, all the 3s, all the 4s. So this is 1s over here. Breakfast.
Let them get into their groups.
No, you can put it off. Thank you.
Great. So once you are in your group, has everyone found a group? Okay, so once you're in your group, as you're having your discussion, just bear one thing in mind. You're going to be at the end of everyone having their say, having a minute to really just discuss something that might have stood out to you, a question that you might be wrestling with. You're going to then have the opportunity as a group to formulate a question. And the question you're going to formulate is going to be a specific question. It's going to be what we call an open question. And so if you can imagine, there's an elephant here in front of me. And maybe this gentleman will be at the tail. And he'll hold onto the tail, and the room's dark, and he says, right, I've got the rope here. This is a rope. And then maybe Kent here will be at the trunk, and he'll go, okay, I can feel something here. It's a fire hose. And maybe somebody in the middle is going to go, well, I feel a wall. And so it's all part of the same elephant. But we might see things or feel things from different perspectives. So what we're trying to develop is an open question that is open to perspective. And the fact that, so I'll give you an example. A closed question would be, if I went over to Kent and said, what is your name?
George.
He just doesn't work with a plan, does he? So I ask a question, I say, what is your name? There's one answer. That's a closed question. It's right, wrong, yes, no, one answer. An open question would be if I went to Kent and said, Kent, what does a good name mean to you? And that could bring up 5 or 6 different questions. It could, answers. It could just create a conversation about what does a good name mean. So do you understand what we're heading towards? Is developing within your group an open question. Once we've got each group's open question, then we'll do something else. We'll be in a circle and we'll present those questions to the group, and then we'll vote on a question. So that's where we're heading, just to give you an idea. So you've got 5 minutes. And so bear in mind, there's nothing right or wrong here. There's no right or wrong answer. This is conversation. Okay. Fire away. Sorry to interrupt. We're going to get some paper to each group and a pen. And if you can choose a scribe, somebody who's going to write down all the points and who's going to eventually formulate the question. Okay, if you can all start gearing towards that question now, and you've got 2-3 minutes to formulate a question. Oh, 5 minutes. This is grace. You have 5 minutes. And remember, once you formulated your question, ask yourself, can I answer yes or no to this question? Can I answer right or wrong? So your question needs to be open. No, yes, no, right, wrong. Okay. So what's come up the most, perhaps not to discuss, which is a formulated question to present to you? And it has to be not a yes or no answer. Okay, you've got 2 minutes to take it home. Okay, now that your question is written down, we're going to move over to the little circle over there, and we're going to carry on the discussion further.